Hello, and welcome to Healing from A to Z with Masterful You and KB. Hi, I'm Chris Burke, and today our topic, being discussed in the Hay Barn, of course, is codependence. Codependence is a really tricky one. It was a really tricky one for me because people used to talk about, oh, that's codependence in a very sort of judgmental, flippant way. Oh, that's a codependent relationship. Oh, you're being codependent. Oh, he or she is being codependent. And I would ask, what does that mean? And I got really confusing answers. And what I came to understand over time is that the people who were talking about it didn't really know. That doesn't mean there aren't people out there talking about it who do know. It just means the people that I was running into were using that as a way of dismissing behavior as less than, as not worthy of their attention. And so I really wanted to understand codependence. And ironically, I found out over time that's because I had a lot of codependent relationships. And let's talk about what that means, because as a judgment, that sounds like a terrible thing. But as a practical aspect of being human, which is, we like to talk about not what's wrong with us or how we're broken, but actually what's going on so that we can apply our focus and heal ourselves and have a better experience if we choose to. So what I found with codependent relationships is that there are those patterns that you've inherited. There are behaviors we've inherited. I'm not sure, looking at the camera, which side of my lip goes up when I talk, but one side goes up just like it does with my dad. I didn't study that or practice that. I twirl my hair the same way my father does. I have mannerisms, like I move my arms in ways similar to my mother. That's not from copying, that's like in the DNA, right? Those are inherited patterns that get passed down generation to generation that actually are meant to help us to improve our survival odds, right? So those are our, what I always refer to as instinct or genetic. So we've inherited certain behaviors, including our interactions with other people. There are ways that we interact with people that we inherited, that came in kind of preloaded, if you will, in our DNA. For example, if a parent is particularly dominant, we might also have a dominant tendency, or manipulative or shy. There are all kinds of different dynamics that we can inherit from our parents. It doesn't mean that we have to be like them. It just means that the propensity. And then you get to the point where you're saying, okay, our intellect, right? So that was instinct. So our intellect will actually adapt to our environment, whatever the situation is. And part of our environment is our own experience. So what's going on inside of our experience? Intellectually, we will adapt to our physical environment, to the environment of the people, the emotional environment, the mental environment, and also that of our own experience. And so I call those intellectual behaviors the strategies that we decided unconsciously, normally, would give us the best chance of survival or the best chance of having a better life, however we define that. Those are intellectual, and those are our adapted behaviors. So at Masterful You, we call Zone 1 your instincts, the things that are inherited, and we call Zone 2 your intellect and those things that are adapted. So we adapted to our different environments using our intellect to say, given this is the situation, these are my best odds. So with codependence, there's a combination of both those inherited behaviors and those adapted behaviors. And because they came preloaded in your experience, if you will, to some extent, and then you adapted to your own family environment, those things have been there, these behaviors, these dynamics have been there since as far back as we can remember. And so they're invisible to us. We can't see them. We don't notice them. For example, if in your family somebody was a dominant person and the way to win their approval, which means to be safe as a child in their environment, was to comply with their wishes, was to do what they wanted, then the tendency would be to become a people pleaser, right? Like, as long as this person is happy with me, I will be safe. That is a conclusion that is drawn. It's part of the intellect adapting to an environment where there is somebody dominant or aggressive. If there's a dominant, aggressive person in a relationship pattern, then that means that there has to be somebody, in order for this pattern to work, there has to be somebody who's submissive, somebody who's willing to please. Which is also where you get into manipulation, because in order to convince somebody that you deserve to be the dominant person in a relationship, there is manipulation involved, right? A sense of like, you owe this to me, you're obligated. A lot of these things can be embedded in our childhood stories, our childhood experiences. Think about parents saying how much they sacrifice for us. You know, there's this sense of like, you owe me because I've given so much of myself. I've given my own life to you. And it's not what they're intentionally doing. This isn't about blaming. It's just that in our social makeup, there's a tendency to want to sacrifice and then to hold that over other people as if it's their responsibility that we're sacrificing. And so you end up with people who, as adults, are going around trying to fulfill obligations that they actually don't realize they made to their parents. We're trying to fulfill imbalances that occurred in our childhood. It can be with your parents or guardians, with grandparents, with siblings. It can be with people at school, with teachers, with classmates. Any pattern where there was an imbalance and we did not resolve that in childhood, we're walking around with that energetic pattern inside of us, inside of our unconscious, and it's expressing itself, right? It's one of the ways that I talk about people not choosing. At least I went through the first 40 years of my life not really choosing. I was doing what I thought I had to do in each situation to take that next step forward toward security. The thing was that at that time I had no idea what security was. I had no idea that it was an internal experience. I thought security was something that I could grab onto in the outside world and hold on to it. The challenge with that, of course, is that we're grabbing and holding. We're always afraid. We're always afraid of losing. And ultimately, we do, because life changes. The job that you had to have, eventually you retire from, right? That things are always changing. The person that you're in a relationship with, who you need, and if they left, you feel like you would be completely screwed. I'm not talking about heartbroken. That's a different thing. But if you feel like you're with someone and if they left, you would be screwed, you want to look at that relationship, because there's a good chance that that's a relationship where you're both getting something from one another that is an attempt to resolve a childhood pattern. And that's what codependence is. And in a way, I want to say that's all it is, because people make it sound like it's such a horrible thing. And yet I've yet to meet someone who doesn't have codependent patterns going on who didn't work to resolve them. Because we're not aware as children. Nobody sits us down when we're children and they're like, hey, here's the deal. You've got these inherited patterns, which you're going to want to take a look at, because some of them have created results that maybe you don't want. Look at the way your parents are experiencing things. There are things that they're experiencing in their lives that maybe you're like, yeah, I love that. And there are other things that you're like, I don't want that. Well, you've got some of that in your inherited patterns, right? And so you want to look at those things and say, how do I cultivate these? Not how do I get rid of them, not how do I get angry about them, but how do I actually, or certainly blame, the people who pass them along unintentionally. It's really about, how do I look at what's inside of me? How do I become aware of those patterns so that I can cultivate them, shape them, tweak them to really deliver what kind of experience it is that I want, right? And so I got off track there, but nobody sat you down to say you've got your inherited and now you're going to get your adapted patterns, and you want to pay really close attention to what it is that you strategize or what conclusions you draw about your best survival odds, because once those patterns are laid down, there's an old Jesuit saying that says, show me a boy at 7 and I will show you the man, right? And I may have just missed that a little bit, but close enough. The idea is that by the time we're 6 years old, we've got that unconscious patterning laid down. And then from 6 to 12, we start to develop it and to become our own version based on our own self-image, the way we see ourselves based on our reflection in the environment. In other words, the way mom treats us, the way dad treats us, the way the siblings treat us and teachers treat us. We start to get a self-image about this is who I am. And what I'm inviting us to do now is to say, well, let's actually go look into our own experience and into our own heart and find out who we are. Instead of asking the outside world, they're all acting out their own patterns as well, their own self-image, their own group identity. Why don't we just go into our own experience and find out what's the truth? So that's what we'll do today. This is the way that we resolve codependence. And I'll tell you, codependence does not have to be, it's not judgment. It's not, this is a bad relationship or this is a toxic relationship and I have to get out of it. It's that if there's a relationship that is not mutually beneficial, then you have a choice to make. But I will tell you that I've been in relationships that were codependent where we addressed that with one another, both business relationships and personal relationships, where we addressed that with one another and said, do we want to see if we can learn to do something else? And we did, using the Masterful You processes. We were able to actually kind of take a little bit of a break so that we could figure out what has this dynamic been, and then come back together. I'm talking weeks, not, months or years. And then come back together and say, okay, let's approach this differently. Because codependence isn't about the people, it's about the patterns. It's about the way we approach relationship and connection. And if we want genuine connection, then we don't want to be operating from a place where we're trying to resolve some old imbalance in childhood. Plainly put. All right, let's jump into the exercise. Enough of that, huh? And actually on Friday, you'll want to tune in. If you find this helpful or interesting, you'll want to tune in on Friday when Judy Forder, my colleague and dear friend, and I talk about this a little bit deeper. It's on Fridays where we go through Q&A. You can submit comments below or questions. You can also email them to info@masterfulyou.com. And we will, do our best to answer your questions during that time. If you like this video, please like, share, and subscribe. It's really important, especially now, that we spread the news to people that they are not broken. They just need tools to help them to create a life they love, to connect with their brilliance, and to create a life that feels good. Because we really have not been taught what we needed to know to do that. And I think that's becoming pretty clear to people these days. Okay, so write down 3 relationships you have that give you a sense, let's say somebody calls you on the phone. Do people still make phone calls? Somebody calls you or texts you on the phone, and your reaction is like, oh, it's a groan. It's like, oh, they're going to want something from me. Write down 3 people like that. And then write down 3 people who you have a relationship with that's based on obligation. So you realize that if you could wave a magic wand and there would be no hurt feelings and there would be no having to say, this isn't really working for me? Who are 3 people that you would just kind of poof out of your life to replace with more connected relationships? This isn't about being alone, because people always think, oh, it's this. That's part of codependence, actually. It's this person or it's nobody. That's codependence speaking, because as children, that was true. It was our parents or nobody on some level, right? But as adults, that's no longer the case. So we want to just create a little bit of space to say, is this a relationship that I'm choosing, or is this a relationship that I feel I need, that I feel obligated to because of some unresolved trauma? Okay, and be really patient and kind with yourself. Being human is hard for all of us. Just some people fake it better than others. Okay, so you've got your universe of codependence. So you're just going to draw a circle around that and say, okay, this is where I'm starting. All right, this is what codependence means to me right now at this time. Not good or bad, just true. And then we're going to say, on that scale of 1 to 10, we're going to use our compass, with 1 being, I can't get out of bed, this is so bad. And 10 being, I love the fact that I had all of these experiences because I learned so much about myself and about life. Where are you on that spectrum? This is an intuitive question. You're asking your intuition. The answer that pops into your mind, that's the one. Write it down. That's your starting place. And I always say it's so important not to judge that. And I know how hard it is. But there is no good or bad. What we want to focus on is the fact that it's really good that you're showing up. It's really loving that you are showing up for yourself and daring to ask these questions, because this will change your life. Absolutely. We're going to set the framework right now. So now we'll interview your experience. At whatever number you're at, we'll interview that experience. You're going to interview yourself. Writing down, I think this is what I'm thinking at this level, at this experience level, right? This is what I feel. This is what I say and do to myself and to others. This is what I sense in my body. This is where I notice tightness. My right hip has been barking at me for the last 2 days, right? So that's something I would sense in my body. What's going on there? And I've been asking. And then finally, what do I know? Write down what you know. Okay, this is your experiential starting place. This is where you are right now. I like to say this is your, if you want to go from Boston to LA or vice versa, you have to actually go to your starting place. You actually have to be there. So a lot of times we'll be talking about, I don't have any codependence. There are no relationships that are a sense of obligation. I've chosen consciously each person who's in my life. And that may be the case, but more often than not, we're just not feeling safe to look at the truth of the relationship because we're afraid that it's going to require change that we don't want to make. And that just is never the case. It's never required. You're in the driver's seat, you get to drive, you get to choose. But when you're informed, you can make an informed choice, and that makes all the difference. Okay, now we're going to decide where we're going. So on that scale of 1 to 10, where do you want your relationship to be? Your experience of your relationships to be? By now you might be sick of hearing me say, I recommend a 7 or 8. Not a 10, because as we improve our relationships and we start operating more from intuition and inspiration and less from that instinct and intellect, then we start to actually expand. And to be clear, because I know a lot of people will gasp when I say less from intellect, what I mean is that we're going to get information from our intuition and our inspiration, our higher levels of intelligence. And we will absolutely process that in our intellect and our instinct. We'll integrate it, right? So you will use your intellect, but you won't be using your intellect to describe or justify or explain away what's happening at the instinctual level that we don't actually understand, you'll be using your intellect to take in this higher information so that you can really make decisions and choices that are in your best interest and that of the people that matter to you. Right? None of us is an island. Sometimes we want to be, sometimes we feel like we are, but it's not actually true. Okay. So write down that number that you want your experience to be at, that you're choosing to move your experience to. And then we're going to interview these higher parts of ourselves and ask ourselves. And this is where we bring in our imagination. I remember hearing that Einstein was working with a group of students. He was speaking to them. And one little kid raised her hand and said, Mr. Einstein, what would you recommend we do to be brilliant like you? And he said, use your imagination, right? That was his answer. So our imagination will bring us all kinds of insights that we're not able to get from our past experiences, which is when we're looking into our memories. So invite your imagination online and say, okay, what's it going to be like? How great could it be out of 7? What will I think? What will I feel? What will I say and do to myself and others? What will I sense in my body? What will be different? And what will I know? And write that down. You're really giving yourself a blueprint for this different experience. Oftentimes we will find that the experience we're having is the experience that was kind of available in our childhood home or in our childhood community. Right? So if we're in a community where people are kind of struggling on the struggle bus, as we like to say, then it's likely that we too are on the struggle bus because that's what we learned. Not only did we inherit those same survival mechanisms and dynamics, but we also adapted ourselves to that. And so now I'm saying, let's invite ourselves to say, I would like a better experience, please. And we're going to adapt ourselves to that, or rather adopt this new experience. Okay, so let's see, where were we? All right, after you've interviewed your future, sorry, somebody just walked by and I got distracted because in the barn I'm usually by myself. So now we're going to ask ourselves, we're going to put in, use the magic toaster. We're going to use our conscious mind, which sets our intentions and asks the questions. We're going to use our conscious mind to interview our unconscious mind and get the information that we need to move forward. It's all in there. All right? It's just sometimes it can be tricky to get it, in part because we've become somewhat disconnected from those parts of ourselves, and also because we have these kind of trauma blocks or these patterns that are unresolved that get in the way. That's why this healing is so critical. As you resolve these old patterns and blocks, they'll move out of the way and your connection to your own brilliance becomes spot on and powerful. And then it becomes natural to create a life you love. So back to the magic toaster, we're going to ask this question. What do I need to know or do to move forward in my experience from a whatever your lower number was to whatever your higher number is? And we're just going to put that in the magic toaster. You can go to masterfulyou.com for this exercise. We have lots of downloads. All of these Healing from A to Z videos are up there. And of course, we have programs, including Own Your Experience, where we will walk you through that process of continuing to interview yourself, make decisions, and take actions that are to your benefit. It is a journey. Although the journey that took me 18 years or maybe much longer, because I probably started the day I started toddling on this planet, right? The journey that took me 18 years, we're now watching people, do in months, in weeks, in the Own Your Experience, to become comfortable in your own skin. And when things happen in your environment, instead of reacting, to actually be able to say, okay, let me see what's going on. Let me interview my experience. Let me get to the bottom of this. let me get my guidance for how to handle this. You develop your trust in yourself, and then as you develop that trust in yourself, those codependent relationships change because you no longer need this other person to be something for you. Now you can actually choose the kind of relationship you want to have with them. It's much more empowering and beautiful and loving to yourself. Thank you for being here today. Thank you for being you. And I look forward to seeing you again soon.